people, let's begin. You all made it here. No reason other people couldn't. So thanks for joining / sticking around for the second session. Second session here, CA signed certs for DFP and WSM. We will describe those acronyms to you here shortly. I think everything is shared out here. Somebody just give me a thumbs up. Make sure you can hear me okay. I believe that's good. Everybody confirm you can hear me out there. Okay. Somebody's saying yes. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. DFP. What's DFP? Diagnostic Framework Portico. That's something we have to be concerned with in our ICM servers. It'd be our routers, loggers, PGs, AWs. So we're going to talk to you about getting CA signed certs for your Diagnostic Framework Portico. Same thing with your CVP web services. Going to get CA signed certs for CVP web services. Slight addendum, I guess, to what we figured out when we were developing all this coursework content. If you took our implementation course, by example, is we did a bunch of CA signed stuff, but there's a couple of just key things you need to do in ICM and CVP in regard to really what it comes down to is getting the CA for the right alias on your system. And I don't think we did a good job at doing that initially. And that was, one of the many things we're trying to figure out along the way. So this is, you might say, an addendum to that information if you took class. We've got now all the stuff updated in our lab guides for people coming forth within class, but this is an addendum to maybe previous presentations. And again, at the end of this marketing promotion, same time savings and money savings that you saw in the last example. So I talked about Diagnostic Framework Portico for ICM. Going to talk to you about Web Services Manager for CVP. These are basically the two services that are running for a lot of your functionality within the SPOG, or if you're a CCE customer, when you log into the Web Admin tool and go to look at your servers and sync things up and implement things like SSO, all this stuff has impact on whether or not that stuff is going to work or not. Okay, so overview. Diagnostic Framework Portico and Web Services Manager require security certificate administration. Okay, that sounds good. Really, I guess ICM and CVP and the whole thing require security certificate administration. We just happen to be doing that by those names on those server types. Okay, remember ICM versus CVP. ICM Diagnostic Framework Portico is a different certificate store than the Java key store and or IIS. Whoa, wait a minute. So all that stuff we just talked about in that previous session with that CCE Java home stuff, forget about that. That was one of really the three key stores, I guess I would say, on your ICM servers that you need to worry about. This is another key store that's different from that CA certs file that we're going to talk to you about. WSM key store, Web Services Manager, is the CVP Java key store. So that is in fact relational to that previous discussion we had about an hour ago, that .key store file. So you're going to kind of see a combination of two things. You're going to see us use that key tool command to modify this key store, and a whole different set of commands to be working with this Diagnostic Framework Portico key store. Kind of wacky stuff. We could use self-signed certs. This example is going to show you CA signed certs. It doesn't really matter if you're using self-sign or CA sign, but CA sign, really all things in. Tried them both, and CA signed, as you might imagine, end up being a whole lot less painful than trying to do self-signed certs across a solution. So even if you're in a lab somewhere, I'd recommend, get another Windows box and make it a CA server and go to town. Get yourself some CA signed certs. We're going to show you the use of a couple of tools, as mentioned previously, the key tool command for our Web Services Manager functionality, modifying that key store file, and something we haven't shown you yet, at least today, this other tool called the DiagFwCertMgr tool. This is actually the name of the tool from the command line. That's the real name of that tool. But this is a tool we use from Cisco that's going to help us to manage this diagnostic framework Portico key store. Applicable to both packaged as well as used CCE. So remember, if you're a packaged customer in the 12X environment, you're doing everything via this thing called the SPOG, the single pane of glass. If you're a used CCE customer, what's common? It's all CCE. Okay. CCE customers, you use the CCE Web Admin, and then you might see actually alerts show up there in Web Admin. If you've got alerts showing up in Web Admin about some kind of diagnostic framework, this, that, or some service not connecting up, you might have certificate woes. We might help you out in this adventure. All right, so first off, Diagnostic Framework Portico certs. Diagnostic Framework Portico certs, basically one of the things we're going to have to do here to get this key store to adhere to a CA sign mechanism is a little bit outside what we'd normally do with CA sign things, where we create a certificate request, download it, go out, get it signed, download the signed copy, and then import the CA cert and the signed cert. A slight variation here to what we're doing. What we're simply going to start off by showing you here is the first thing we're going to do is just get a CA cert. But the key thing is that CA cert's going to have the private key exported as well. We'll show you how to do that. If you're doing this through an actual vendor, this would be something you'd have to ask for, I assume, along the way. So we're going to get a CA cert, make sure that that private key is exported. Basically what that means is we need a .pfx file. From that certificate, we'll show you how we're going to get this thing called the thumbprint value. That's basically a unique value that identifies this cert, and install this PFX file into the personal key store on our ICM server. We're going to show you how to do all this stuff. Then we're going to use this command line tool called the DiagFwCertMgr tool to navigate our key store, this Diagnostic Framework Portico key store. We'll use that tool first off to unbind the self-signed cert that's included by default, and then show you how to use that tool to bind the CA cert using this certificate's hash value that we found somewhere in step 1. At the end of all this, we're going to need to stop and restart the Diagnostic Framework service. Make sure that it goes out there and rereads the contents as well. So that's the overview of our steps. Let's get into those gory details. First off, we need to get a CA certificate, which in and of itself is not that hard, but the key thing, we got to get a CA certificate with a private key. So if you're doing this, by example, in a lab, as we were here, or maybe internally, if you have Microsoft certificate services running, this would be a valid way to do this. If you're going through a real vendor, I don't exactly know what you have to request from them, but you'd have to have a CA cert with the private key. And so what we're showing you here in step 1 is we've opened up the certificates management console snap-in, and we've added in certificate management here on our CA server to go out there and do an export of our CA certificate with the private key. And again, that's only because I'm running a CA server here within the lab environment. So I'm on that server using the certificates management console to go out there, and you'll notice that what's in there by default in my personal certificates is actually that CA certificate, is what I'm pointing out here. I've got that certificate highlighted. I'm going to do an export here. And when I do an export, the key thing is you can export certificates from all kinds of places, but trying to get one exported that'll give you the option to export it with the private key is the challenge. So this is one of maybe several ways you can do that. So here I'm saying, yes, I want to export the private key. Notice what it's basically going to create is a .pfx file. Not the world's most foremost security person, but a lot of files like a CER file, certificate file, that would not have, by example, a private key. A PFX file would be capable of having a private key. They're all certificate files, basically. And basically what I did is exported that certificate. There's a couple steps here where I created a file name, downloaded it, saved it in a location. And then what I can do is actually take a look at that certificate, either via the management console or opening that certificate up. And what I'm noting here is in the certificate itself, somewhere we've got this thing called a thumbprint value. And this thumbprint value is, you can see down here below, a unique hexadecimal value that identifies this certificate, the thumbprint, so to speak. And I'm going to copy that thumbprint, just highlight that whole thing, copy and paste it into something like Notepad. And then somehow manually I've got to climb in there and get rid of all these spaces in between all these values. So I end up with a big long string of gibberish that's hopefully all combined together, no spaces, in some kind of a text file somewhere. Why are we doing that? I'll show you that in 1 second. Then what I'm going to do is now go to my ICM servers. Right now I'm on all my ICM servers, so my routers, my loggers, my PGs, my AWs. Primary DAW is probably most important here overall. Really, all of them are. And I'm going to install that PFX, basically, which is going to import that certificate. What you kind of see I've got highlighted here, I'm just in Windows Explorer, highlighting the CA cert with the private key. Notice that's that PFX file. If I right click on that thing, it gives me an option to install the PFX. Oh, that sounds fancy. Really, it's just going to import that certificate. But when I import that certificate, kind of make sure that I import that certificate to the right spot. Notice I'm importing that certificate. Notice I've got to put in the password for the private key. Password down there is probably Cisco. And got to make sure, this is probably the key thing, that certificate that you're importing with the private key has to be placed into the local computer's personal key store. That's where this Diagnostic Framework Portico thing is going to be looking for that certificate. So in the personal key store. And you should come up with some kind of a successful import. Remember, I'm doing this on all of my ICM servers. Okay. Next step, on my ICM servers, I got to get to this utility called the DiagFwCertMgr tool. That utility is in some folder location buried deep on your ICM server, highlighted here, ICM Serviceability Diagnostics bin. That search path, not by default in the search path on the system. You could add it in there, I suppose, if you wanted to, but you're not going to be here doing too much work. So we're in that folder, that bin folder, which happens to be the location of that utility. And also you don't have to specify any other key stores. So really just go to that folder and you're good. And we're showing you here that if I do the DiagFwCertMgr // , as with most command line tools, it'll give me command line sensitive information about what the heck I'm actually trying to do here for further future reference. Step one I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this DiagFwCertMgr tool and execute a task. Everything is kind of task oriented here. So the task I'm trying to execute is I want to unbind the current certificate. Current certificate is just a self-signed certificate. Got installed in there when you installed ICM by default. And I'm simply unbinding that certificate currently. So what comes up down below, it says, oh yeah, we're executing your unbind certificate task. Got some port number going on down here we'd probably care about for other things. And notice, looks like it says we deleted the existing binding successfully and deleted the entry from the service registry, whatever the heck that means. Basically, it should show that you've got some success going here with unbinding the existing self-signed cert. I'm going to turn right around and bind the new CA cert that we've imported. Remember that CA cert, which is really not a local certificate for this machine. It's just the CA cert, but with private key. Okay. We've got that thing copied into the personal key store on the ICM servers, or imported as a PFX file. And what we're going to do now is run this DiagFwCertMgr tool. Another task we're going to execute here is bind the cert from store. And notice we got a /cert hash right next to it. And then what we're doing is we're pasting in the contents of that thumbprint that we got from the certificate itself. So the thing is all one line in the real world there, but basically using that DiagFwCertMgr tool, the task we're trying to execute is bind a certificate from a store. What store? Well, the store, the personal store is where it's looking. And what we're trying to do is match up to a certificate that has this hash value. So if in fact you've copied that certificate in the right spot and it's got that hash value, what you should see here somewhere down at the bottom is that it actually worked. Local computer personal certificate store was opened successfully. Certificate requested found in the store. That means you did all the right stuff. Okay. And then it goes through some more stuff, all tasks completed successfully. So you should see some successful output as a result of what you've done. What do I got to do next? Well, I've got to restart the diagnostic framework service. I could use Windows services to accomplish this task. While I'm here at the command line, we can use one of these service control stop features and or service control start features. That's just a command line utility. Notice when I'm starting, stopping and restarting is the diagnostic framework service. So again, you could use service control if you're not familiar with that utility. We're kind of showing here that if I stop it, it says its stop is pending. And you go, well, geez, how do I know it stopped? Well, rerun that command. And what it should come back and say is it failed to stop. Notice here because it's not been started. So I guess that tells you apparently it stopped. Same thing when I do a service control start. It says start is pending. How do I know it's running? Well, if I reissue that command, notice it actually says it failed. It says, well, you can't start it because it's already running. I go, oh, okay, well, sounds good. Okay, so service control might be a valid option as well. And then after that, you go, well, what did that do for me? In theory, what you've got going on now, maybe after some patience and waiting, is less errors or alerts showing up in your SPOG if you're a packaged customer, and or less alerts showing up in maybe your unified CCE Web Admin tool, which is basically what the SPOG is minus the SPOG for CCE customers. So that's what you should experience as a result of maybe your efforts here. And again, you could do all this stuff self-sign, but it's a lot less painful if you just use this method, I'm convinced. Okay. So same thing is true over here with CVP, except for there's a different key store. And there's some different considerations with CVP as far as getting CA signed certificates going on for this thing called Web Services Manager. I remember in ICM, I could count 3 key stores you got to modify. In CVP, there's at least 2, maybe, depending on what you're doing with things like secure media fetches, by example. So what we're going to show you in this little section here is how to view/delete the default self-signed WSM certificate on your on your CVP key stores, kind of like we just did over there on the ICM Diagnostic Framework Portico tool. We actually first off had to delete just the built-in self-signed cert. So we got to do the same thing over here. Then do more of a traditional approach over here with our key store in the form of, first off, got to generate a CSR, a certificate signing request, for our alias WSM certificate. That's probably the key thing here to make this thing work, is this alias. Then we're going to download that certificate signing request, get it signed by the CA, whoever that might be, and then upload the CA cert as an alias of root. If you had intermediary certificate servers along the way, you'd also want to upload those as well right about here. And then last but not least, upload the CA signed cert as the alias WSM certificate. So again, this alias over here is kind of key to making all the CVP stuff work correctly with CA signed service functionality. At the end of it, just like we did in the ICM world with restarting Diagnostic Framework Portico, here we're going to restart the CVP's WSM workstation management services. All right, so 5 main steps that we preach, usually with CA signed certificate stuff. Is independent of whether you're doing this on a VOS server, so call manager or finesse or CUIC, live data, whatever any of those VOS servers are, steps are still the same. Command line functionality on ICM servers with the key tool, command line tool, or any other GUI tools, functionality is still the same. Only thing that was a little bit different was that CVP Diagnostic Framework Portico thing, where we had just the CA certificate with the private key. So that was the weird oddball, odd thing out. Here, more traditional approach for CA sign things. Any platform you're on, first step, generate a new certificate signing request. That is kind of the application. Hey, I would like you to sign the certificate for me. Generate it on the box, download it. Some of the boxes, that's kind of a single step process, right? You generate it, and in the last step, it says you want to save this as a file. You go, yes, I do. Well, from the command line, these are actually two separate steps. From IIS, as an example, that's really one step that you're doing. So you get this certificate signing request. Now you just got a file. All right, what do you do with this file? You take that file and you submit it to your CA server, whoever that happens to be, or CA provider, and they are going to sign that. We'll show you how to do it here in our lab environment. And then what they're going to give you back is hopefully two things. The root CA certificate, as well as the signed certificate, and it's your job then to import the root certificate, if it's not already in there, and import the CA signed certificate that they've signed back. Okay. By example, if you're using GoDaddy here, you would already maybe have the GoDaddy root CA certificate in the key store. May not actually have to import that thing in there. May not need to do that step. All right. So again, all this stuff is the same on each platform. CVP here is no different. Remember though, CVP is kind of painful because A, the key tool command that we need to use to modify the key store, that's not in our search path. And B, the key store file, which is in the Cisco CVP conf security folder, well, that doggone file has a unique password on every CVP server. So if you had 38 CVP servers, you get 38 different crazy passwords. To get to that password, as we showed you earlier, you're going to have to go to the Cisco CVP conf folder. In that folder is a file called security.properties. If you type that file out, it'll show you what your doggone password is, which you're going to need when you're using this key tool command if you're going to be modifying this key store, which is a file named .keystore. Got it? Okay, let's move on. What are we doing? First off, we're going to climb in using this key tool command, and we're going to have to delete the existing certificate named WSM_certificate. So that's what this slide is going to show you here is a couple of steps with that. Notice that we're in the CVP home folder, right? That's Cisco CVP under JRE bin. Why is that? Because that's where this utility named key tool exists, right? So I'm in that folder, but that's not where the file exists that I need to modify. So I'm going to have to do some finagling here with my Windows navigation skills. So I'm trying to use this key tool command here to do a list. And if I just did a list of the key store, it would show me all entries. If I do a list of a specific alias, in this case, an alias named WSM certificate, alias is just a nickname of a certificate. I'm going to use this list command to list this alias, name this name. This is the key store I'm trying to modify. So that dash key store says, here's the file I want to look at. Remember that file is in a separate location from where the utility is. So notice I'm putting in the whole path here, CVP home conf security dot key store. That's actually the file that I'm trying to look at right there in that folder location. Store type, JCEKS, you got to put that in there. I added in a -V for verbose output. And then I've got to put in the store password. And I don't have to type that in there right now as part of the command set. It would prompt me for that if I wanted to, but that's that long password that I got from that security.properties file. So that's a pretty crazy command right there. Just to list one entry, that's exactly right. So we're kind of showing you, oh yeah, we've got this entry listed here. It's got a chain length of 1. Chain length of 1 typically indicates that the owner is the same as the issuer. And if the owner is the same as the issuer, what that means is you've got yourself a self-signed certificate now, don't you? Right? Which, you know, is the way it came out of the box. So we go, okay, well, that's cool, but what I really need to do is delete that thing. So step 2 down here, using that key tool command to use a delete command, trying to delete the alias named WSM certificate from the key store of that location and that file name. And by the way, here's the doggone password for that key store. So comes back and it tells you nothing. But if I reissue that list command of that alias, just hit the up arrow twice, notice what it should come back now and say the WSM certificate does not exist. So fancy way around here of first off just listing that alias. Step 2, deleting the alias. Relisting the alias. And it should show as gone. And why is that? Because we don't want that thing in there. What we want instead is to generate a new key pair. Now, generate a new key pair from this command line utility. Same thing as generate a certificate signing request. They just had to make it difficult for you to remember and go, oh, what am I doing here? Generating a new key pair, as the command line utility we'll talk about. Same thing as generating a certificate signing request, by example, in Call Manager, any of those VOS servers. So again, using the key tool command against my key store, the .keystore file, and I'm using now the gen key pair switch to generate a key pair for this alias I'm declaring right here of WSM _ certificate. Make sure you get that name correct. Make sure you don't misspell that name. It's got to be that specific alias is what it's looking for. I can add some other switches in here if I want to. By example, I added in a validity. Validity is measured in days. So I'm giving this 2 years as a validity. Key size, 2048 bits, key algorithm RSA. That would match up to all version 12 recommendations. And again, providing my store password in here. When I issue this command, what it now happens is it comes up and it asks me to fill in all my X509 information, as you would have seen in other things like IIS, by example, if you generate a CSR. Key thing here is when it asks me for my first and last name, it's my one and only chance right here to put in my fully qualified domain name. You're not putting in your actual first and last name. That would be not good, people. You want to put in the fully qualified domain name, hostname.domain name, as that server is known in DNS. This will save you a whole lot of pain. Remember, the alias has to be this name. The first and last name actually has to be the host name, or FQDN, really. Other than that, it's going to ask you for your organizational unit, organization, city, locality, state, province. That should match with whatever your CA certificate was submitted with as far as your organizational information. In the lab, it doesn't really matter for much of anything. What matters up top is a couple of things. Again, alias name, and of course, the FQDN over there. So what that did for me at the end of all this stuff, it says, hey, going to generate a 2048-bit RSA key pair and self-signed certificate, validity of 730 days for this server. Is this correct? Yes. Okay. Press enter if you want the password to be the same as the key store password, or just press enter there. And it says what we're doing now is storing that into the key store. All that did was generate the new CSR, but it didn't allow me to download a copy of that. So what I've got to do now on the next slide is just simply download that CSR. Remember, if this was IIS, you'd be kind of doing this all in one fell swoop. Here, all I'm simply doing is using this key tool command with the cert request switch here. The cert request is, I'd like to download a copy of this certificate request. For who? For the alias WSM certificate. And I'd like to create a file on the C drive named something.csr. In this case, CVP WSM.csr. And the key store I'm trying to do this against is that .keystore file. And the password is that long password that I typed in. So I've got to put all that stuff somehow on that command line switch. And that's just to get a local file downloaded. That's basically my certificate signing request. Step 43, I got to take now that certificate signing request and submit that to my CA provider and say, please, CA provider, sign this certificate signing request form. Here I did this in the lab. So we simply navigate to our cert services server. It's got a web front end. It's, not very fancy or pretty, but it gives you some options there to get a CA request signed. Click on that advanced certificate request. And at some point in time, you take that file that you downloaded, you open it up in Notepad. It's got a bunch of text gibberish in there. It's got a start a file, end a file. You copy the whole thing and you paste the entire contents right into this window right here. Right. Pick some kind of certificate template. Pick just web server here. That certificate template might override some things like your validity period. If you put in a 2-year validity period with your certificate signing request, and the template over here has a 1-year validity period, well, guess what? You're going to get back a 1-year valid certificate. So your template that your provider is using for CA services has really all the definitive stuff to sign that certificate to say you are valid from here forward for a period of 1 year, 6 months, 5 years, whatever it happens to be. Here within the lab, after we submit that request, it comes back, post haste with an ability for us to actually download that certificate. And all we're showing you here is that, I'm not sure what happened to my slide here, but I guess I'm downloading a file named CVP.cer. And this is my signed certificate request is what that is by the CA. It's a CA signed cert. So I go, hey, cool, that's my CA signed cert. Somewhere along the way here, it also gives me an ability to download the CA cert. I may already have that if I have other CA things going on or other certificate things going on from the CA provider already. So got 2 certificates, at least I got to import. I got to import the CA cert, and I got to import that certificate that the CA just signed. Somewhere in the middle, if you have intermediary certificate servers, you might have those certs you need to import as well. But for this adventure, at least the root as well as the CA sign. Okay. So what we're showing you here is now we're going to import the root CA certificate. Key thing is when you import the root CA certificate, everything seems to be driven by aliases within these key stores, having the right alias. So we're going to import that certificate as an alias of root. And again, how are we going to do that? We're going to use the key tool command, which is in some crazy folder location. We're going to use the import command line switch with that. Doing a trust CA certs against our key store of .keystore. Store type J, say, CEKS. You got to do that on your CVP servers. Notice here, alias of root, and the file we're trying to import is some file in some folder location of some name. Right? Name doesn't really matter, but this is in fact the CA's root certificate, wherever the heck that thing came from. Did a verbose switch here and put the password in there, that long password. And notice what it comes back and it says, oh yeah, I've just imported that root CA certificate. This I would recognize as being, oh, that's my root CA certificate. So that thing got imported with this one command here. Got to do that before I'm putting in the CA sign cert. If I had intermediary certificates, I'd want to import those in between the root and the CA sign cert. Final step though here, going to import the CA sign certificate as the alias WSM certificate. Remember the CA certificate got imported as an alias of root. The CA sign certificate is going to need to get imported as an alias of WSM certificate. So basically the same key tool command trying to import into a key store. Validity, right? Got that put in there. I don't know if I had it to add in there. Alias WSM certificate from the file named CVP signed.cer. Okay, well, don't bust me because that file name didn't actually match the name of that file I downloaded, but it would have to, right? Somewhere along the way. And the store password was that long password. It says certificate reply was installed in the key store. You should see that as the end result. Remember when you generated that certificate signing request, you kind of had an open request out there on that server. It was saying, hey, I'm hoping you're going to get back with me with the reply of that certificate signing request. So as long as you put in the right alias name and have the right certificate in there, you should get that end result. And of course, you could go back and use that list command to make sure that that key store and that file is listed out there. You should now see a chain length of 2 as an example. First device in the chain would be the CA certificate. The second device is the device you're looking at here. Any other intermediary devices as well. Last but not least, what you'd want to do now, just like we did on the ICM servers for the Diagnostic Framework Portico, here we're just using Windows services to stop and restart the Cisco CVP Web Services Manager. Web Services Manager is looking at this Web Services Manager certificate to see whether or not it's CA signed or not. And in theory, because your ICM primary DAW, which for CCE purposes is basically where your SPOG is, right? If your ICM DAW had CA stuff going and all of your CVP servers stuff are looking at the same CA server, well, if we all trust the CA server, we should all trust each other. And hopefully what will come about as a result of this is maybe less alerts in your SPOG and or in the CCE Web Admin tool as well. So that's what's going on there to help you out with those adventures. Let me pause right here and say, yeah, that's a lot of information. So people got questions out there? Clarification? Again, this is recorded. So for future reference, got that going for you. And documentation, I would say in Cisco land getting better. When we first kind of started out, this was kind of new really to everybody, including, quite honestly, some of the developer people that were over there, right? They're like, how do you make all this stuff work? So that's fair. It's a bit better now, documentation wise, about how to make this stuff work. I don't know officially what other utilities might be out there built into CCE, but again, I've seen some utilities forthcoming in some other versions of stuff, like newer versions of Call Manager, that seem to be maybe a better ability to do some key store modification. But anybody have any other input for certificates or key stores or tools you might use to help drive you less crazy? No tools to drive you less crazy. All right, well, the rest of it, I think most of you have heard, because I think most of you were in the last session where we kind of talked about the different classes we are offering these days. Let us know if we can help out with that. If you're got enough people, remember, we can come to you as opposed to all of you coming to us for a class. Tell all of your friends about how cool this stuff is. Get them all signed up and enrolled. And that's about all I got for you. That was a little bit longer than the last session at 1 p.m. my time, which is in about 2 hours and 15 minutes, if I can calculate things correctly. 1 p.m. we're going to have the final session of the day. Final session of the day is a session on custom functions within script editor of ICM. So that would be pretty good time. Somebody's chatting me up here. Sean says, great showing. Cool. Hopefully we helped you out overall and maybe learned you a thing or two. Appreciate you signing up for these. And that's all I got for you, people. Anything else from you?